Hi, thanks so much for joining us today. We are in conversation with Zaretta Hammond. We are so excited about our conversation today, which is going to touch on culturally responsive teaching and learning recovery. So welcome, Zaretta. I'm joined today with my colleagues, Joyce Highhouse and Nicodemus Ford. We are so honored to have Zaretta Hammond with us today.
Thank you for having me.
For some, we're talking about returning to full-time in-person schooling, and some see it as a return to normalcy and to the status quo, while others are hoping to seize upon the opportunity to re-examine the systems that have resulted in educational inequities. My question is, what should leaders prioritize as students return to school?
Ooh, that's a rich question. Because again, I think in education, our tendency is to want to go technical. Tell us the first thing to do and then the next thing to do, when what I really suggest is we continue to think about what's the interplay of things. Now, a lot of people are talking learning loss, and what I am trying to help folks understand is brains don't turn off when they're in school. And so children have learned something. The question is, how do we capture and utilize and leverage what they've learned? So leaders have to prioritize the interplay between social emotional well-being in a classroom at the same time that they are helping to reestablish the routines and rhythms around kind of the content in a way where we're really making sure that students have an intellectual curiosity about learning. Because there's a way in which if we don't watch ourselves, we're just going to go back to, we got catching up to do, and now we're kind of like doubling down, and we're really going to, let's prioritize kids kind of getting this content versus how do we create the environment where we actually can go further faster because we've actually prioritized the interplay between that intellectual curiosity. We're here to learn. We're a community of learners that has that social aspect to it.
So in your book, you share culturally responsive brain rules that I love, and including the first and most important rule that you've identified as the brain seeks to minimize social threats and maximize opportunities to connect with others in the community. And often in the work we do with districts and schools, issues around implementing social emotional learning and academics are often thought of as completely separate. And so can you talk about what your research and experience tell you about approaching academic and social emotional learning separately?
Yeah, I can tell you that the research that is out there, not just my research, but the research around the science of learning, and this is actually the research around cognition, right? Neuroscience, the social and cognitive neuroscience branches, that cognitive processes have a emotional component, a social and emotional component. So the reality is, if we don't want the brain to be flooded with cortisol and the amygdala to be hijacked so that it now goes into fight or flight or appease or freeze modes, then we have to make sure that we're creating an environment that is continually signaling to the brain, this is a safe space. It's a safe space to make mistakes. It's a safe space to be yourself, that we know that that is what is critical. Now, the implementation of social emotional learning, the way a lot of folks have done it, has gone to the technical side. And as a consequence, what we see is, it's Mood Meter Monday, and it's Giving Wednesday, and it's, Being Thankful Thursday. And, what if I want to be thankful on a Monday? What am I going to do? Right. And so what we have so made this social emotional piece technical, we think it comes out of a program we've purchased. You're not going to get social emotional learning and development out of a binder. This is why Vygotsky talks about this relationship between the teacher and the student, and why I captured that as a learning partnership, that it is the social interplay that gives students a sense of safety and trust so that they can actually stretch themselves. The teacher can offer the student both care and push. Because here's the thing, we don't acknowledge that the brain gets anxious when it is bored. Meaning, not that we have to keep kids entertained, but it means if it doesn't have intellectual stimulation that it can lean into, productive struggle, then that is going to manifest itself as a social and emotional glitch. And that may be beyond the 15 minutes that we did SEL at the start of the day. So we haven't yet trained teachers to be attentive to the social emotional issues that come with cognition, particularly when we're talking about getting students in their zone of proximal development. So that should be a whole different way in which we think about social emotional learning and development. Can you hold social and emotional space for students during cognition? Particularly when you're asking them to stretch, because again, they might have negative self-talk about themselves as a learner, or they might feel that failure means I'm bad. There are so many other social emotional pieces that have gotten reduced and kind of pushed to the side in, favor of this kind of reductionist approach we do to social emotional learning that's been very canned and, become very technical.
And so have you seen in your work examples of places that are approaching this differently? And what are those sort of are there any key elements that you notice about the way in which either teachers are constructing their role or leaders are supporting sort of the deeper environmental work that you're longing to see in classrooms?
I have started to see a few places, not as many that are purporting to use social emotional learning and development. Those places where they're talking about whole child development, and what I am just, mentioned, I'm not seeing enough of teachers experiences where teachers are holding that social emotional space during cognitive tasks. So I'd say that's our growth area. There are spaces and places where the culture and climate for kids has gotten very positive, and districts are replicating that at a level that it's okay. I think our challenge and our opportunity still comes when we have high numbers of Black and brown kids in a classroom, because what I am seeing is still we have not mastered that. That is why you have to do social emotional learning and development through a culturally responsive lens. Because if I interpret students talking to each other as problematic versus that is a cultural response to processing content, then I actually should structure that into my classroom rather than ding kids for actually processing information in ways that are congruent with how teaching and learning happens at home or in their extended community. So that's where being culturally responsive, even as you're implementing a program, cultural responsiveness is about the lens toward that program. It is not a program.
That's really helpful. I think that makes a lot of sense, just to think about how do we, not even in the approaches that we take to should we buy this package or that package, but really this idea of how do you look at all of the work that you're doing with students and integrating those relationships and that and the rigor that you talk about so beautifully in your book.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Monica, it's beyond relationships. So even if we still use the word relationships, I distinguish between rapport and a learning partnership and having an alliance. Because I still, I've got to be Mr. Miyagi to Daniel wanting to learn karate. They weren't peers, they weren't being friendly. That was a mentor coaching someone into it. We still have to see social emotional learning and development as I can hold space for you to have stamina around productive struggle. But if that's not how we're talking about it and we keep reducing it to the word relationships, that's an oversimplification.
I appreciate that. So we are just so grateful for the time that you spent with us today, a master class in understanding the connections between culture and the brain, and expectations and the ways in which we are harming our own selves within the education sector by asking the wrong questions or focusing on the wrong things. And so just really want to appreciate your time. So at Pivot and Core, we bring over 20 years of experience driving continuous improvement and really helping schools and districts to think about how to design and implement solutions to these challenges in achieving educational justice, and really that focus work of improving teaching and learning. So we hope that you'll take this time to learn a little bit more about us and what we provide to school districts. In particular, CORE can provide remote consulting services. And so they can customize those services to meet your team's specific needs around addressing mathematics curriculum implementation and effective instruction, as well as ELA. And at Pivot, particularly in the prevention and intervention services area that Nicodemus, Joyce, and I lead, we focus on ensuring equity and excellence for all students. And that includes building MTSS that focus on improved outcomes for all students, policies and systems around identifying and supporting students with learning disabilities, addressing those sometimes challenging issues of compliance related to special education, and really how we can better align the delivery of general education and special education. We also really want to build your capacity around the implementation of evidence-based curricula and high-quality instruction. Here's our contact information. You can contact the Director of Literacy, Carrie Thomas Beck, at CORE, and here's her contact information, or myself over at the Pivot side. So thank you again for being part of our conversation today. Take care.